All right, folks, how you doing? Thank you so much for joining us today for the latest installment of This Is CDR. My name is Chris Neidl. I'm one of the co-founders of OpenAir, and it's our network that produces this program pretty much every Tuesday for the last couple of years. And the objective of this program, if you're a first-time viewer, is to introduce our community and the world at large to many of the movers and shakers, drivers and innovators in the carbon dioxide removal space that mostly consists of the CEOs and founders of CDR startups and companies, but we also often have folks that are more on the policy end of things, or sometimes some science experts to give us a deep dive into related subjects. So really, really excited to have you all here with us today. And what I'm going to do is just quickly tell you a little bit about the program, about OpenAir, and then I'm excited to introduce our guest today, Matt Schmitt from Structure Climate. So just a little bit about OpenAir. We are a kind of an interesting network. We're not a formal organization. We're just a network of people all over the world that are enthusiastic and supportive of carbon dioxide removal. And together in groups, we work on what we call missions, which are structured projects. And those focus on a few different action areas, or what we call domains. One key area that we work a lot on, and is certainly going to be very active in 2025, hopefully in the next week or two, I can tell you specifically what we're working on, but that's advocacy. So our members, we have a lot of activists in our communities, and we work together mostly to research, develop, draft, and then introduce legislation, particularly at the state and municipal level. And so we've been behind one of the main drivers of carbon dioxide removal support legislation in the US at the state level for the last couple of years. We've introduced many bills and passed, I think we're up to about 6 different laws now. We also have a great part of our community is our R&D, or sort of maker community. And these are groups of folks that get together and work on citizen science projects, as well as open source tech. And at some point this quarter, we'll have the team from Epiphyte on. That is a homegrown indigenous miniature direct air capture device that we developed starting almost 2 years ago. And we're building our latest version of that here in Austin, Texas, where I'm based at UT with a bunch of students. So you'll hear more about that. Education programs. So This Is CDR is really one of our flagship programs here. We do it weekly. I described it already, but we have other programs that we do, webinars, live events, happy hours in different cities. We created a kind of a chat GPT for CDR only called CDR AI, which I'll drop the link for in a second, which is a great tool to learn more about carbon dioxide removal, whether you're a total newbie to the space or you want to do a deeper dive on something very specific. And then we also work on what we call activist business development, or enterprise. And that's where we might have ideas for CDR enterprise, or we want to support others who are developing them with our volunteer power. And I'll just provide one example because they're going to be our guests next week. And this is a project that I've referred to before. We've had a couple of This Is CDR webinars on the Naka Valley Biochar project. This is one of my favorite projects in my now long career that I've ever worked on. And it's a biochar enterprise that was started by and run by a group of refugees in Uganda at the Naka Valley refugee settlement that are producing biochar to use locally on within their large settlement. It's mostly a farming community. And OpenAir members have been involved from the very beginning. The guy who kicked this off, Marius Aragi, himself a refugee in Uganda, joined OpenAir and expressed he had an interest in biochar. And that was well over 2 years ago. And now they're producing biochar. And there's an interesting element, too, around how people can do direct purchases of carbon credits through a whole other piece of this project that's been developed by a UK-based startup called Bioenergy. And so next week, as I'll say at the end, we're going to have some folks from this team on for our next episode of This Is CDR, and to tell you about the project. But it's also going to be an opportunity when we're opening up the first live purchasing of credits directly from their project. So we're going to talk about the project, then we're going to talk about if you want to be a supporter or buyer of carbon dioxide removal credits for this project. You will learn how next week. So very excited about that. Hopefully you can tune in. Open Air, if you do join, I will drop some links. It's just me hosting today. So when I get a free moment to drop some links, I'll drop the link to Open Air. You can join our Discord, which is kind of like a Slack, and that's where our members get together and chat and plan and jump on Zooms to move forward their mission. So we hope if you haven't joined already, you will. So for today, really, really excited. Matt, sorry I didn't get a good headshot from you. People will see your face in a second. But we have Matt Schmitt, who is the CEO and founder of Structure Climate. And me and Matt connected probably, I guess, initially a few months ago around some common interests related to around innovative ways to fund carbon removal, particularly drawing from other sectors and areas of climate tech. And we really hit it off. And I thought what he was pursuing was quite interesting and like things I hadn't heard before being applied to carbon removal. And so I thought it was high time for him to come on and talk a little bit about Structure Climate, but particularly what he's working on in the carbon removal finance area. So I'm really excited to have Matt join us. I'll bring him up to the stage right now. Turn this part off here. Give that a more normal look. Hey, Matt, how you doing? Thanks for joining us. Oh, I think you might be on mute. Go ahead and click that there.
No, actually, I like to just lip sync and then you can lay over the audio later.
Yep, that could be really effective. And I'll just go ahead and just give a little bit of a background, and you're going to fill in some blanks during the Q&A. But Matt, as I said, is the founder and CEO of Structure Climate, which is based in the Minneapolis area of Minnesota. And as you'll hear, Structure Climate works to unlock early stage financing for climate projects that are too small for traditional commercial debt. That is a huge need, I will underscore, in our small but fast growing sector. And Matt, he launched the company last year, and he was building on a pretty long background of experience as an independent consultant for startups, corporations, and also even the U.S. Army, which maybe we'll hear a little bit more about. So Matt, fantastic to have you, and looking forward to your presentation. After Matt's presentation, I'm going to ask a few questions as moderator, but as I go, feel free to ask your own questions. I think this is a very potentially really useful, both for us, the answers we can deliver, but also some of the ideas. So we welcome people's ideas and comments. So just pop those in the comments section and I'll pull it up on screen and include you right in the conversation. So with the Matt, I'm going to go ahead and add your presentation here and allow you to go ahead and present, and I'll see you on the other side.
That sounds great, Chris. Thank you. Let me just test my arrows there, see if that works. Yeah, cool. Okay, great. Well, great to be here. I really like the ethos of the open air community in sort of getting down to action. I think action is so valuable in the face of the climate challenges that we face, and that's going to be a thread that I'll come back to again and again. So, Structure Climate, we are here for climate companies. We help for-profit companies doing impactful climate work get accessible financing. That can mean a lot of different things. That can look like a lot of different things, but fundamentally, our goal is to prove out and scale up the viability of business models that are in balance with the climate. And again, climate can mean a lot of different things. But as we get into this, I think you'll start to understand kind of how we think about that. So just to start with our theory of change, the really kind of core of it is if we can get more projects funded faster and we get smaller projects funded faster, we can reach commercial maturity that much sooner. And that can produce a lot of different benefits. It produces data sets for the industry. It produces track records for investors and other entrepreneurs to engage. More importantly, it produces information from action. I think that is really important. Like Chris said, I was in the Army a lifetime ago, and you learn pretty quickly that if the map and the ground don't agree, it's the map that is wrong. And so you can sit looking at a map, but until you start actually getting out there and doing things, you're not going to have kind of a fully accurate view there. And then lastly here is this just idea that we need to make it real. And what I mean by that is that, the climate crisis and all of the ways that it manifests is global in scale. It is a massive challenge along a lot of different fronts, and yet action in the face of this scale of challenge has to be hyper local, has to be centered, has to be a million people doing a million things every day at their level, and it will change as they go. And the more that we keep climate sort of theoretical in discussion, the more I think we hamper people recognizing the power of their own agency. And then vice versa, the more we can show what progress looks like, how climate positive work can manifest, how it can show up in communities, the more we empower people to understand what is possible, what they can change, and go from there. So that's a little bit on our theory of change and how we see the world. I do want to take just a moment to talk about a couple of terms here that we'll be using a lot, and call this like project finance 101, debt, equity. We don't have to get into the specifics here, but I do want to leave you with the idea or the understanding that there is really a spectrum, and finding the right capital tool for the right project is really important. And just like if all you have is a hammer, everything you see is a nail. If all you know about is one kind of investing, then that might be what you look at for solving every kind of challenge. And there's a little more nuance to it than that. So the way that I like to think about it is really where you start to have physical assets, real world movement of atoms or molecules. You need cash flows that can align with that. You need infrastructure like financing, and we do this all the time in transportation and logistics and all sorts of natural resource industries. And that's a really important tool. On the flip side, as we have intellectual property and ideas and more sort of ethereal progress that we are working to manifest into some kind of change, often equity is a good solution there, because you allow for better upside alignment and better risk alignment. And again, it's not that there can only be one or the other, but that climate challenges, like lots of other challenges, will need different tools at different times. And so hearkening back to the bridge, like we are here to help climate companies transition from the capital that gets them started, which is often equity, to the capital that they need to grow, which is often debt. And so that's why we're doing this. What I think is interesting, and I'm a sucker for a good historic analogy. So any and every analogy anyone wants to share, let me know. But I think that it is interesting to look back at how we as an economy, as a civilization, as society, have manifested technological changes in the past. And we can see pretty consistently that there can be a multi-decade approach to get new technologies adopted, and that happens for all sorts of reasons. And so our goal here with Structure Climate is to say, the ways that we can bring and need to bring our economy in balance with our climate. We don't have 50 years to wait. We have to accelerate the paths to commercial maturity for a wide variety of different types of technology. And so it's the structuring approach to the project financing that we believe sets us on the path to that. Okay, so what does that actually mean? What is that like? What do we look for? How does that actually get started? So to zoom in a little bit, we look for three things primarily when working with projects, and that is, first and foremost, is there customer demand for it? And this, depending on your background, this might seem counterintuitive, or it might seem obvious. I like to just make it clear that if you are doing climate positive work, first and foremost is you have to be able to sell that, because the reality is that in a voluntary market or voluntary environment, which many climate companies find themselves, you have to be able to sell. And it took me a long time of working through my own feelings and thoughts and philosophies and so on to be able to just consistently put that aside and say, if there is a buyer, let's start there. And if there's not a buyer, then go out and get some buyer feedback, get some customer feedback, share your vision with who you think values what you want. Not because everything has to become a product, but because I think we have shown pretty consistently that as we can align business models with opportunities, we can get rapid adoption of a lot of different kinds of technology. So that's why we really start with the customer and say, what are you doing for them? How engaged are they? What are they buying? How do they know about it? Another benefit here is that a lot of climate companies are small. They're new. They don't have a credit history. They don't have, 3 years of audited financial statements. They don't have, a whole bunch of the sort of conventional artifacts that traditional lenders will look for. And that's okay. Like, part of having a really engaged customer working with you in a voluntary sense is that they are committed to what you're doing. If Microsoft is going to buy CDR credits, as people in the audience here have been through their diligence process, they have an extensive process. As Frontier goes to buy, whether you're going into which side of their program, like, they spend a lot of time engaging with the companies that they want to buy from, and that's great. That's fantastic. We can piggyback on that when there is not necessarily a clear set of traditional financial historic documents there. And then the other side of this is, do you have a reasonable operation? Do you have a realistic plan? Are you doing what you say you are going to do? Have you done that before? What does that look like? Again, this harkens back to the military, or it harkens back to being a parent with a bunch of small kids, which is like, the real world is going to come calling. And if you have a plan to adapt to it, like, great, let's get you on your way. And then if you don't, then maybe there's some space there to build out a little more of the plan. So then lastly, and we'll get into this a little bit more later, but that is when we can align with the IRS definitions of charitable purposes, we can start to unlock new capital tools that can make the financing here just that much easier. It's not that we're solving technical or engineering or scientific problems, but rather by bringing in certain kinds of financing, we can give teams more space, more attention, more time and bandwidth to focus on the technical, scientific, and engineering problems that are truly distinct to what they are doing. Okay, so if I were me listening to this, I would be saying, that's great, but what does that actually look like? And so here's where I want to talk about, what this can look like in CDR. And while we do work with CDR companies, I will also say that we take a broader view on climate. So like I was just saying with the IRS view, there are lots of ways to think about positive climate impact. And carbon removal is one area there. So Carba is a company based here in Minneapolis, and they are putting some biochar kilns on a landfill that is located in the city of Burnsville and operated by Waste Management. Their technology and their process aligns with one of Isometric's recent methodologies on biomass burial. So they have clear demand from a wide set of engaged parties. Second, they have a reasonable and realistic operation. They've been deploying their biochar at increasing scale. They've been mixing it into landfill cover operations so that all the parties involved can see, what does this look like from a dust perspective? What does it look like from a noise perspective or smell, or how does it actually, feel, look? What is it like when you kick it? And they're engaging with a local manufacturer who, while they don't have, necessarily a ton of experience building biochar kilns, there are enough similarities with other types of equipment that they have built that they are a strong, committed, engaged partner. And when we can bring in this kind of realistic operation, from Carba's perspective, one of the appealing parts of our approach for them was that as they were considering raising an equity round, we actually were able to have them raise a smaller amount of equity capital by unlocking an additional kind of capital for the project side of the work. So to harken back to the debt versus equity difference, we said let's keep your equity financing on the stuff where you'll get equity-like returns, the IP that you're developing and so on. But if you're just moving trucks and moving biochar and running front end loaders, like, let's use the right kind of financing tool for that. And so, while it's a smaller equity round in terms of overall capital, it also means less dilution, less they get a better multiple on the equity capital that does go in. And so again, it's the right capital tool for the right kind of problem. And then lastly, in terms of meeting the IRS charitable purpose, in this particular case for Carba, we brought together the 11th Hour Project, which is Eric Schmidt's family foundation, former CEO of Google. And his family foundation, they look for opportunities to support waste reduction and waste mitigation and improve overall health in water systems. What they appreciated in this case was the opportunity for financial innovation. So they can support this project, and when the project pays back, they can recycle the funds that Carba repays into other projects. And depending on your background, you may or may not know that foundations like that have a requirement from the IRS to disperse at least 5% of their assets under management each year in order to maintain their tax-free status. That is often done in the form of grants, which is a great mechanism for that kind of capital to get out. But what's nice about the way that we set this up is that the capital that the 11th Hour Project can put in here also counts for their 5% disbursement requirement. And so where a grant to support this kind of project would get used and then be done, this kind of capital starts to create a cycle. It starts to compound. And that's really one of the accelerating ways that we see in terms of achieving our theory of change, and that is that we can boost climate with charitable capital. Because we are meeting these IRS definitions, and because the IRS allows for this kind of capital to be deployed independent of geography, so long as it's focused on impact, we can do a lot of different things with this kind of capital. And so a donation that can generate tax deduction opportunity can also generate compounding impact, as it can get loaned out to these companies doing climate positive work and then repaid. And then along with the lending, the companies themselves get more efficient tax treatment as they receive the capital. They can use the capital for the project as they need to, but because it is charitably backed loan, we can be a little more flexible on terms. We can be quite friendly. And so the whole idea is, again, more projects, smaller projects funded faster gets us to commercial maturity that much sooner. A couple other things that I just want to touch on, and then am excited to get into questions, and that is that this whole idea of charitable funding for climate lending can come from a lot of different sources. It can be somewhat daunting to look at global capital markets and think, that's a massive amount of money out there. How can, something small ever make a difference? But the reality, as probably a lot of people on this call know, is that climate projects start small. They have to start somewhere. And so our goal is to, again, get these for-profit climate companies started such that they can then graduate to more conventional forms of financing. So, like a scholarship, like training wheels. I mean, there are lots of ways that we, in other areas, provide early support with the knowledge and the goal that the entity or group receiving the support will be able to move on. We'll be able to move on to something more complex here. So when it comes to sources of charitable capital for this kind of work, there are a lot of different opportunities to do that. We've been partnering with the Venn Foundation. They have a particular focus on really like strategic creativity and the deployment of philanthropic capital. They've been a really great partner here. And so, yeah, if you have any other questions here, happy to follow up afterwards. And then really what I want to leave you with is, we are bumper bowling for climate solutions. There's nothing about getting projects started that is going to prevent these projects from growing successfully. But again, as we get our theory of change put in place with more smaller projects funded faster, we see an opportunity to get people up to speed, and they can go off and bowl wherever they want to after that. So that's really it for structure. That's the work that we're doing. Chris, I'm realizing that one of the slides here didn't pop in, but we have a handful of projects that we're working on that I can just talk through briefly. Different climate technologies in biochar, wastewater treatment, and EVs. And then for any accredited investors who are interested in learning more, we're also launching a private debt fund later this year to really begin to scale up more of this kind of lending, where the risk scoring, the proprietary risk views that we're building as we get started with these sorts of loans help us get, again, more smaller projects funded faster. So,
yeah, that sounds great. Why don't we go ahead and start with that, since the slide was missing? I don't know if that was on our side or something, but if there's any other, you mentioned the Carba project, which Carba is such an awesome company. I put the link. We had the Carba guys on This Is CDR a little over a year ago, so that's worth a watch. They're also an awardee of the Four Corners Carbon Coalition, which I'm the executive director for. But so that was good that you kind of spelled out the sort of specific elements of how project finance works for them, blending in a philanthropic contribution to unlock it. Is there one or two other projects that might be a bit different from that you wanted to highlight at all?
Yeah, let me, I think I got the slide thing. Yeah, there we go. If you can toss that up. So
yeah, there you go.
So we briefly talked about biochar. Another client has a really interesting modular wastewater treatment system that is super applicable in the Western US, where for a long time the solution for managing wastewater from a variety of different sites was simply apply it on land or go spread it out in the field and the sun will take care of it. And there are some downsides to that, but lots of remote sites like dairies and wineries and breweries and mobile home communities and tribal communities lack the conventional infrastructure to appropriately process their wastewater. And so a modular deployable technology can make a real big impact there. And then we have a couple of areas where we're working with electric vehicles. So one is a rideshare motorcycle in Eastern Africa, where for drivers there, and we can boost the take-home pay and reduce the exposure to air pollution. And in the case of dense urban areas on the East Coast in the US, there is a lot of intrinsic interest in EVs. But the 80 or 90% of the EV chargers in the US are in garages, and you don't necessarily find a ton of garages in some of the denser urban areas in the US. So as we can expand public access to EV chargers, we make it easier for people who are otherwise intrinsically motivated to have those kinds of vehicles access that in a way that works for them. And so again, just the through line here is it's relatively de-risked tech. There's a clear and engaged party that is in demand for this, and the plans and operations are reasonable. And because we meet the charitable purpose causes, we can layer in this kind of charitable funding for these types of projects. And then I'll say on the fund, we can then use that charitable funding as like a first loss tranche or a de-risking buffer for more conventional opportunities. So our hope is that we can then also become the financing partner of choice for these companies as they grow.
Yeah, well, I'm dying to hear just on the EV motorcycle front. I have pretty strong ties to East Africa. I mentioned the Naka Valley project, but I've spent a lot of time in Nairobi. The traffic in Nairobi is just absolutely horrendous at certain times. So motorcycles are a great way to get around. So I would love to learn more about that. And whenever you can disclose more about your wastewater client, we're looking very specifically on the integration of wastewater and CDR at Four Corners for our next grant round, focused on the States. So would love to hear about that, because I'm sort of doing the due diligence to find out how many providers could potentially be eligible for such grants. So that's an interesting portfolio that you're working on there. Got some great questions that have come in already. Got some regular open air champions. Carl Dans has a good question, and Aiden Preston at the US DOE asked a really good question. I'll get to those in a second. But just to start a little bit, back out a little bit, this is always the first question we ask with This Is CDR, is we're really interested in the people behind the companies, and who are the lunatics who decided to jump into CDR, given how young and uncertain it remains in some ways. So would love to just hear a little bit more about your journey into CDR. Obviously, you're focused on various other areas of climate tech, but you're elevating this. And then I do have a question about Minnesota, which I'll ask afterward. But yeah, tell us a little bit about your CDR journey.
Yeah, no, that's sure thing. I feel like I've heard a lot of people say something like, they don't have a conventional background, and I guess I've heard that enough that I would say the only people with conventional backgrounds are the ones that you don't know. So I might say I have a totally conventional background for CDR, and I think anyone who takes the time to join this call and listen to this is likewise has a perfectly suited background for CDR. My specific journey started out in the Army. I was a logistics and operations officer after studying math at West Point, and then was overseas for a number of years, just doing various international support work and kind of cross government support work. Spent time in Eastern Europe and spent time in Afghanistan, and wanted to get out to sort of pursue public service in other ways, and so saw that opportunity in energy tech. I went to the business school program at Yale, and then worked at Enernoc before they were acquired by NL, and then was at Cargill for a number of years. They're a big food and ag player based here in Minnesota that is really like, it is the physical supply chain of the world. Cargill touches about a quarter of the world's food supply in different points of time, but really the impact is massive. And yet, what I liked about working at Cargill, what I liked about working in energy or working in logistics in the military, was that there was so much that needed to happen smoothly that would allow for other, the operations or the people or the teams to get their work done effectively. And that's a pattern that I've continued to carry forward. So what got me into CDR was seeing the need for that continual delivery of smooth operations so that people can continue to do what they need to do best. And I looked at sort of emissions reductions as a major challenge and scaling up carbon removal as a major challenge. And, whether it's the 80 or 90% reduction in annual emissions or like a 1,000% scale up in carbon removal, I was drawn to the challenges of growing this sort of new kind of industry. And that's what got me in. And then from there, as I got into project finance and so on, saw opportunities beyond CDR, but certainly have a sweet spot for that particular niche.
No, that's great. So CDR was kind of the thing that drew you into this, and now the other parts there. And
yeah,
I remember if we established on last time we talked that I was in Afghanistan for about 18 months working on renewable and energy access projects. And
very cool.
Yeah, about 10, 12 years ago. Interesting place to work. So about Minnesota, then we'll get back to the subject at hand. I love it when, I'm a New Yorker. I work a lot in California. A lot of the bills that we've introduced have been sort of the usual suspect of climate forward states, but particularly in the middle of the country, there's really interesting, not only opportunities, but activities that are already going on that I think are overlooked. So I count Colorado as probably the top of the heap there for that, in Illinois. But Minnesota has been really intriguing to me for a while, not just because there is some conducive policy background that might create openings for CDR support, but there's a really cool ecosystem of companies, your own included. So I didn't know if you wanted to just give a shout out and kind of characterize what you think of the Minnesota or maybe the Northern Midwest CDR scene more generally.
Yeah, I mean, I'm incredibly biased, so I'll just I'll start there. But no, tons of great groups doing good work here. Grid Catalyst is a program that partners climate companies with a lot of Fortune 1000 type companies to actually get pilots up and running. So shout out to Nina Axelson. She's a great partner for anyone that's looking to actually prove commercial traction. But also Mark One, a recent initiative designed to launch like industrial climate tech. Julian is leading that, and he's also here in Minnesota. Lots of great work at the U. It's the PACE program in Minnesota is one of the most active PACE programs in the country. Top
property tax based debt.
And sort of stepping back a little more like philosophically, I think what is interesting is that climate is a physical resource challenge. It's a natural resource challenge. We're moving molecules, we're moving atoms. It's not just software. And so you need physical industries, and America, we have a lot of space for large physical natural industries. And those industries often happen outside of the kind of urban concentrated areas where perhaps the need for or the interest in these kinds of solutions is really clear. But the resources, the space, the infrastructure is in the Midwest, and finding that kind of balance where you can just engage people that are on the ground, that are doing the work is really that's really what engages me in this work. It's like it can be made real for people regardless of how they feel about it. We don't have to talk about the science to be able to talk with a farmer about like increasingly extreme weather patterns are challenging to farm in, and managing soil acidity is a challenge, and the feedback loops can be so visceral that it creates space for just different kinds of solutions to be made real. And so again, to echo the theory of change, like get more smaller projects out there, make it real for people, help them understand what progress and action in the face of a climate crisis can look like in their community. And that's all over the place here. It's all over the place, in Ohio and Iowa, in Missouri and Indiana, Illinois. It can look like a lot of different things in a lot of different places. And that's really the beauty of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm intrigued. I'll be in Minnesota at the beginning of March because we're doing a screening of Legion 44 in partnership actually with the state government. We've had Lila Connors on the program before. She's the producer of that feature-length documentary about carbon dioxide removal. So excited to hopefully grab a drink with some of the folks in that. Alkali Earth is another one of those companies that's been on before.
Yeah, totally.
And I posted a link to our video with them a couple of years back. So yeah, that's really, really intriguing. Let me, we have some really good questions that already came in. So I'm going to go right to those from our audience, if that's okay with you, Matt.
Yeah.
And oops, this is a big question, so it's covering our faces here. But Aiden is actually a science fellow at the DOE's, Office of Carbon Management and Fossil Energy, or the other way around, who's working on CDR. This is a great question. How do you define clear demand in terms of time? You're referring only to projects that have secured customers through a lifetime of the project to enable the project, or do you also consider making investments in new tech that has some customers, but that haven't completely sold out their credits?
Yeah, great question. So the new tech side, we're not necessarily going to be the right partner there. And actually maybe I can flip back here. When I talk about kind of what we look for in clear demand, part of having clear demand is what allows us to also engage the tax advantaged charitable capital to be able to lower the overall costs for these kinds of projects. And that is because the companies that we lend to are for-profit companies, the companies utilizing these charitable funds are for-profit companies. They have to demonstrate good stewardship of the charitable funds, which in the eyes of the IRS are considered a public good. And so the way that filters back to demand then is to say, if you can use a portion of charitable capital and you have a contract with a buyer that can repay that portion of charitable capital, then that's great. That's clear demand. That does not mean that it's the only option there. Like I said briefly on kind of the right tool for the right project. People in your audience may have heard of blended financing solutions. That can be pretty common in this space too, and that's where there might be some charitable capital mixed in with then some private investment capital. And so where that might happen, you have a lender at a higher rate and a charitably backed loan at a lower rate. The overall cost of capital becomes lower for that project. So there's no crystal clear answer to clear demand, but having the ability to remain a good steward of that capital is part and parcel with how we can access this particular tool in financing.
Yeah, and it seems like understandably on that demand side, for solutions that are purpose-built for taking carbon out of the air and their main revenue source is selling carbon credits is one thing, but like the instance of Carba and some of the other things, there's a use value and there's a revenue stream or a cash flow that's associated on the co-benefit side. So at this point, are you really sort of focused on those kind of infrastructure integrated value adding where you can have more of a stack that demand is based on rather than just the pure carbon credit solutions?
No, in that, again, I would say we look for where there is a clear demand from a customer, and there could be all sorts of reasons that customers buy what they buy, right? And so like biochar is such an interesting example here because there are so many different business models that can work for biochar. And this is where the hyper local opportunities are made real. So in the case of the work here in Minneapolis, there happens to be a surge in wood waste, and Carba presents an opportunity for waste management to eventually generate additional revenue at landfills by being able to take a wider set of waste streams and reduce their costs by eliminating or reducing the amount of soil that needs to be trucked into a landfill to maintain their cover. And so like additionality doesn't play a part in that. It's happening right now because of the cost to get started. But there might be biochar companies that sell product to the animal nutrition operations to maintain, moisture levels at healthy degrees, or biochar integration into building materials, or even utilizing biomass for like distributed energy generation. There can be a lot of different reasons why a particular project is in demand. And so that's where, like, who's the customer, what are they buying, and are your operations realistic? We're not looking at additionality per se. We're not looking at, is it like what methodology or so on. It's like, who is buying what they are buying, and if they buy a lot of that, then they're a smart buyer. Let's have a closer look there.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing before I forget, we won't have time today, but we should talk about the PACE finance thing, because I am obsessed with building integrated and property integrated CDR solutions. I've been looking at it really closely in New York.
Yeah,
it would be interesting to see. I mean, could you get, some of these sort of integrated mineralization companies, or the ones that have equipment that's on site within a property tax paying
yeah,
lot, to get it expanded beyond renewables and efficiency and storage. But, we could talk about that all day long, unless it's something that, also you're focused on. But
it is not something that I'm focused on now. When I was with Cargill, I did some work expanding PACE to apply to farmland improvements. It was just again, like the right kind of financial tool. Doesn't solve every problem, but if you have something that is a better fit than a one size fits all sort of tool, then you tend to have a better fit. So
yeah,
frustration.
For those who aren't familiar, it's PACE is property assessed clean energy finance, where you incorporate a loan basically into your property taxes. It gets added to your property taxes, and you pay through your property taxes. It's a really interesting tool that's worked quite well for solar in particular. We have a couple of other questions, two that are very similar. Sandy asked, are you working only with companies in the US? But Guy, great guy, Guy, good to have you here from Rocky Mountain Institute. He asked about it, not just about the geographical, but there's implications that there's some complex interfacing with the IRS tax structure. So tell us a little bit about your own footprint. And are you only working in the US, or do you mentioned East Africa, but what's your geography like at present?
Yeah, so we are not just constrained to the U.S. in this model. We do mention the IRS as a way to access this lower cost of capital, but the thing about the IRS and the charitable purpose tests is that can look like a lot of different things in a lot of different places. So, for instance, part of what allows this to be applicable in Kenya, in addition to the pollution reduction benefits and so on, is that according to the World Bank, it's a lower middle income country, and that gets a different that checks some boxes in how the IRS views this. So really, our engagement on that side is just to make sure that the dollars remain compliant, and that the parties on both sides of the transaction have what they need. This mechanism of lending charitable capital has been established for decades. It's been around for a very long time, but it's a little tricky. It's not always clear and intuitive. And so we really focus our effort on centralizing those challenging parts. But from there, if there is a donor that wants to support a project somewhere else in the world that can meet charitable purpose tests, and we can absolutely facilitate that kind of support.
Great. Some other really good questions. We're getting a bit of an all-star cast here of people that are asking questions here. Yarkot is a really great analyst consultant, works in the EU, just has a great question. Before I get to that, though, I'm going to get one of my favorite open air members who always answers the call, is Carl Dans. And he had this question: how is it important for larger impact investors such as DBL partners to get involved in CDR soon?
This is, if there were sort of one area where I have a hot take, this might be it. And that is that if someone isn't ready to get engaged in CDR, then they shouldn't get engaged in CDR. And I think that we need to talk about CDR like the luxury good that it is currently, which is not to say that it will always be a luxury good.
Yeah.
But just that purchasing it is voluntary at the moment. And because it's voluntary, customer preferences can be incredibly idiosyncratic. And yet plenty of luxury goods makers do a lot of really good business. And what we see again throughout history, a sucker for a good historic analogy, is that spices that start out as luxuries become commodities. Coffee that starts out as a luxury becomes a commodity. Eyeglasses that start out as a luxury become commoditized healthcare. So luxury good does not just mean fine wines and sunglasses. It can means like voluntary purchasing and idiosyncratic tastes. And so our goal is to get, again, more smaller projects funded faster, make it real for people. And that starts to make it clear that, impact investors need to get in. There's no opportunity, they have to get in. It makes all sorts of sense for them to get in. So I wouldn't say that they have to engage so much as if it works for where they want to hit on the risk return curve, like let's talk about how they might engage. The other thing there I'll add is that, just like we sort of diversified Carba's capital stack by letting their equity investment focus on areas that are better aligned with equity returns. If there is an investor that, a VC managing a fund that wants to offer, some tax efficiency opportunities for their LPs, if portfolio companies are in climate, then that LP can potentially recognize a tax efficiency and create this revolving loan fund mechanism to support these kinds of projects. And so we can better line up the capital with the projects and with the work, but I am much more focused on starting where there is demand and working backwards than in trying to shift an entire industry to see it.
You're 100%. You've said so many things, just themes that have come out of your presentation and answers that really resonate. One is that on the luxury goods side, I mean, just the absolute critical role that group is an early adopter that helps make. I remember when I worked in India in energy microfinance, and this brilliant guy, I can't remember what company he was from, gave us the story of pressure cookers, and that you needed to have the higher income households would buy them. And then it became this sort of aspirational good, and it proved it out. And it just by creating this sort of logistical networks to distribute them. And, we have this conflict in CDR, I think, where the problem is so big and it was introduced to the public on this sort of gigaton global sort of level that it causes us to, at our own peril, sort of skip over the critical importance of these small projects that, as you said, make it real, and that all of the other large projects or whatever our future vision is, we all depend on getting more and more of those first of kind projects out into the world for the investors, for public acceptance, and for policy. So I think we're absolutely on the same page there.
Yeah, just a little bit of language that I like to introduce there, and that is that we can and absolutely should seek scientific convergence, but that doesn't for a second require commercial. I'm sorry, we should seek scientific consensus. I get my words mixed up there. That doesn't require commercial consensus. We can have commercial diversity and divergence. It's like when electricity was starting as an industry, right? Like we didn't know anything about the science, and there was nothing like a business model. And now we know a lot about the science, and it's the same, everywhere. But the business models are the same. Who can make energy? Who can buy it? How it's sold? Like the plugs, the designs, the frequencies, right? Like that can all be diverse, and that's okay, because electricity is a means to an end. You can refrigerate your food to keep it preserved, regardless of the grid that you're plugging into. You just need a principle that works there. So with the tendency to say that we have to have commercial consensus at the same rate that we have scientific consensus, I think misses the beauty, the reality, the power of the human spirit to solve challenging problems that we are facing head on.
Hallelujah. I mean, that's the thing that is so, you get accused of being a techno optimist or something like that, but like the record is clear empirically of like things come up. We tend to be good at responding to problems. It's just whether or not we can mobilize,
Well, like, call me a techno optimist to be I guess a parent putting kids in diapers. Like, I'm not trying to keep them in diapers. They're all
what's the alternative to being it, but yeah, that's I agree with you 100% on that. And the thing with CDR is so complicated from a financing perspective and from everything too, is that we're not talking about, with solar, I maybe over depend on that as a sort of a frame of reference. Those were flat, solid state squares.
Yep.
Use the same electrons as everything else, fed into the same grid.
Yep.
So the sort of the certainty around it, where here, the beauty of CDR is it's so diverse, but it makes the whole assessing risk and getting people to sort of buy into it all that much more complicated.
Well, right. I mean, we're saying take this invisible, inert, odorless gas, and we'll put it somewhere that you'll never see it again. And here's the invoice.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's very different than solar. But we have plenty of other areas in our economy where we sell in the sense of invisible assurance. Like we walk into buildings every day with a sense of invisible assurance that they won't collapse. We have like life insurance policies with the sense of invisible assurance that capital will be there in the event of a need for a claim. And this is where, working at Enernoc in demand response, like what we sold was the lack of energy that was not used, which is fundamentally like an invisible, ethereal product. But we had mutually agreed upon baselines that, worked in a particular commercial setting. Like there were clear and engaged customers that bought what worked for their grid. That was like a luxury good. And that was what we needed for the transaction. So I totally agree that solar is used a lot, and there are lots of great lessons from solar. We just, let's be careful about which lessons we take from what.
Yeah. Well, we have time for one more question. It's a really good one. And this opens up a whole other can of worms. But had we had more time, we could talk. You and I have talked about policy, offline. I have a couple of ideas have already even come out of this conversation, but you already asked a really good question. He knows a thing or two about the subject. What is the investor's perception of policy dependence? This is critically important. If a tech requires policy funding support, whether it's 45Q or what else is going to come online, is that a significant risk in case the tech becomes unviable without future support? Many global CDR projects require some support, especially at scale. Very good question, Yuri.
Yeah. So, this is a bit like saying, am I going to buy good glasses if I don't get if I can't use my HSA on them? And like some people will and some people won't. And that's kind of the distinction that we would bring to this kind of evaluation. So again, to return to the customer demand, some customers only want to engage if there is that policy support. Some customers are willing to engage and want to engage ahead of this policy support or engage independently of it. Likewise, on the capital side, sometimes capital likes to get in early to prove what's possible. Certainly our talking point of making it real resonates with people. And so and then also sometimes just showing people what's possible is a big part of making policy. So like, for instance, here in Minneapolis, they started picking up organic waste from residences 20-ish years ago, not because some whiz-bang spreadsheet said you should do it, but because enough people made it a hobby to compost in their backyard. They chose to make that a luxury good, and they made it real for policymakers. And then this community said, okay, this is how we want to make this happen. So I did say like policy support is it's not a binary. It's a thread in the tapestry that we are looking at when considering this. And so really it's like, is there a customer? Are there clear operations? And do we have an opportunity to use this tax advantaged capital as a way to better align the right kind of capital tool with the right parts of the project?
Yeah, it's this feedback loop between comes out of random places, whether it's, early adopters can come in all sorts of shapes and forms. They get it to a certain level, it scales, it starts to get certain financing, costs go down, it attracts another type of buyer, it goes up. And then where policy comes in, sometimes it's a subversion of policy where you're using, in those early days where nobody knows what the hell you're talking about, you have to sort of piggyback on another policy and shoehorn what you're doing in there just to get to a high enough level. So anyway, we can talk about that all day long. But we are at time. Matt, this was a great conversation. I would love to have you back, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you and hopefully seeing you in Minneapolis in a little over a month. But this was an excellent discussion. I did add Structure Climate's URL. Please do check them out. I do have a feeling you'll be back to talk with us maybe next year, Matt, but this was great.
Perfect.
So I'm just going to quickly, before we sign off, just a quick message here. Again, next week, please do join us. I dropped the Luma in the URL. I'll drop it in as soon as I stop talking. But this is a project that is so open air and so near and dear to our heart. I think you will love it if you haven't heard about it before, but we'll be talking about it next week. We'll be talking about how you can buy credits directly and the whole blockchain way in which we've created a sort of a distributed way to verify credits. So everything about this project is amazing and literally one of the just most satisfying projects I've ever worked on over the last couple of years. So hopefully you can join us. But with that, I will drop that Luma link, but I'll bid you all adieu. And thanks everybody so much for joining us. This was a great discussion. Oops, wrong one. There we go.